April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land. These opening words from the waste land have haunted readers for over a century, yet their true meaning remains shrouded in mystery. Why would the month of rebirth and renewal be cruel? Why does spring bring not joy but anguish? The answer lies not in the surface paradox but in the profound psychological and spiritual truth about human resistance to transformation. April forces us to confront the comfortable numbness we've cultivated through winter's dormancy. It demands we emerge from our protective shells of forgetfulness and face the painful beauty of consciousness. Today, we'll excavate the layers of meaning buried within this immortal line, discovering how it illuminates our modern condition and offers a path toward authentic renewal. This isn't merely literary analysis, it's spiritual archaeology, unearthing the fragments of truth about why growth hurts and why we fear the very thing our souls most desperately need. Chapter 1: The Biological Betrayal of Spring. Spring arrives as nature's ultimate paradox, promising renewal while delivering disruption. The earth, comfortable in winter's honest death, suddenly convulses with unwanted life. Roots stir in frozen ground, sap rises in brittle branches, and bulbs split their protective casings to thrust tender shoots toward an uncertain sky. This biological imperative mirrors our psychological condition with startling precision. Consider the lilac, my chosen symbol for this cruel awakening. Through winter, it stands stark and honest in its dormancy, no pretense, no false promises, merely the truth of temporary death. But April's warmth forces transformation. The lilac cannot remain comfortably dead, it must burst forth in purple abundance. Vulnerable to late frosts, exposed to storms, its delicate blooms lasting mere weeks before falling to earth like memories of hope. We humans have developed our own winter strategies: emotional numbness, routine's anesthesia, the blessed forgetfulness that allows us to function without confronting life's ultimate questions. We learn to live with diminished expectations, finding safety in spiritual hibernation. The heart grows still, passion freezes, and we mistake this protective death for peace. But April disrupts everything. Longer days pierce through carefully constructed darkness. Warmth penetrates our psychological permafrost. Something stirs within us, call it hope, call it longing, call it the terrible recognition that we are alive and must therefore choose how to live. This stirring brings not comfort but crisis. The dead land of our inner landscape begins to breed possibilities we thought we had safely buried. Memory, that most unreliable servant, suddenly awakens. We remember who we once hoped to become, what we once dared to dream. We recall the taste of authentic feeling before we learn to substitute sentiment for sensation. April forces us to acknowledge the gap between our current existence and our soul's deepest longings. This recognition is inherently cruel because it shatters the illusion of contentment we've so carefully maintained. The biological world offers no choice in this matter. Growth is compulsory, transformation inevitable. A seed cannot decide to remain dormant indefinitely. Genetic programming ensures emergence regardless of external conditions. But humans, blessed and cursed with consciousness, can resist their own flowering. We can choose the living death of perpetual winter, maintaining our protective numbness against spring's demanding invitation to fully exist. This is why April becomes the cruelest month. It exposes our self-imposed limitations while simultaneously offering the possibility of transcendence. Like the lilac forced from dead land, we must face the vulnerability of authentic existence, knowing that growth requires the dissolution of everything we thought provided security. Chapter 2: Memory and Desire, the Twin Torments. Mixing memory and desire, in these 4 words lies the essence of human torment and the key to understanding why spring feels like violence against our carefully constructed peace. Memory and desire, when combined, create a volatile compound that explodes our illusions of contentment and forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth about who we are and who we might become. Memory, properly understood, is not mere nostalgia or simple recollection. It is the sudden resurrection of our former selves, complete with their hopes, fears, and unrealized potentials. When April's warmth penetrates our psychological defenses, these buried selves emerge like archaeological artifacts, demanding acknowledgement. We remember not just what was, but what might have been. We recall moments of authentic feeling before we learn to substitute habit for genuine response. The cruelty lies not in the memories themselves but in their timing and context. Winter's protective numbness allowed us to exist without confronting these echoes of possibility. We had achieved a kind of peace through forgetting, not just forgetting events, but forgetting our capacity for transformation. We convinced ourselves that our current diminished state represented the full extent of human possibility. Then April arrives with its irritating insistence on renewal, stirring these dormant memories like sediment in still water. Desire, memory's dangerous companion, emerges simultaneously. Not the shallow wanting that drives consumer culture, but the profound longing that exists at the core of human consciousness, the desire for meaning, for connection, for authentic existence. This desire had been safely buried beneath routine and resignation. We had learned to want smaller things, achievable things, safe things. We had reduced our expectations to match our circumstances rather than expanding our circumstances to meet our deepest longings. But memory reminds us that we once desired more expansively. We remember when we believed transformation was possible, when we trusted our capacity for growth, when we dared to imagine ourselves capable of greatness. This remembering reawakens desire in its most dangerous form, the desire to become who we actually are rather than who circumstances have made us. The mixing of memory and desire creates an unbearable tension. Memory shows us what we've lost or never fully possessed. Desire insists it might still be attainable. Together, they shatter the comfortable compromise we've made with mediocrity. They expose the gap between our actual lives and our essential nature. They reveal how much of ourselves we've sacrificed for the illusion of security. This is why so many resist spring's invitation. Awakening memory and desire means accepting responsibility for our own transformation. It means admitting that our current state, however familiar, may not represent our fullest possibility. It means acknowledging that growth requires the courage to abandon familiar limitations for uncertain expansion. Winter offers the mercy of dormancy. We can exist without fully living, function without flourishing. But April's cruel kindness forces us to choose. Will we remain in the safe death of perpetual winter, or will we risk the vulnerable flowering that authentic existence demands? The choice itself is the source of spring's cruelty, not that transformation is impossible, but that it remains eternally possible, waiting for our consent to begin. Chapter 3: The Underground Network of Roots. Beneath the surface drama of spring's emergence lies a hidden world of preparation and connection that illuminates the true nature of transformation. The root system that supports April's visible flowering has been developing in darkness, creating networks of nourishment and communication that most never see. This underground reality offers profound insight into how authentic change occurs and why surface appearances often deceive us about the nature of growth. Consider how roots function in the darkness beneath our feet. They extend themselves gradually, establishing connections with other root systems, creating vast networks of mutual support and resource sharing. Scientists now understand that trees in a forest communicate through these root networks, sharing nutrients, warning of dangers, supporting struggling members of their community. What appears above ground as individual trees reveals itself below ground as an interconnected organism of mutual dependence and care. Human transformation follows similar patterns. The changes that appear suddenly in our lives, moments of insight, bursts of creativity, spiritual awakenings, have actually been developing through invisible networks of preparation. Ideas, influences, experiences, and encounters create underground connections in our consciousness, building the infrastructure necessary for visible growth. What seems like spontaneous flowering is actually the culmination of extensive subterranean development. This understanding reframes our relationship with periods of apparent dormancy in our lives. The times when nothing seems to be happening, when we feel stuck or stagnant, may actually be periods of crucial underground development. Our consciousness is extending its root system, making connections we cannot yet perceive, preparing for future growth we cannot yet imagine. The mistake lies in judging our progress only by surface appearances. The root system also reveals why genuine transformation often feels disruptive and uncomfortable. As roots extend and deepen, they necessarily disturb the existing soil structure. They break through barriers, displace established patterns, create new pathways for nutrients and water. Similarly, psychological and spiritual growth disrupts our established patterns of thought and behavior. It breaks through the hardened ground of habit and assumption, creating new channels for wisdom and experience to flow. This disruption is particularly pronounced in spring because the increased activity above ground demands expanded support below ground. The visible growth we associate with spring, new leaves, flowers, fruit, requires a corresponding expansion of the invisible root network. Trees must literally break new ground to support their visible flourishing. Human consciousness follows the same principle. Expanded expression requires expanded foundation. The cruelty of April becomes clearer in this context. Spring demands that we simultaneously support new growth while maintaining existing commitments. Our psychological root system must expand to support the flowering possibilities that memory and desire have awakened, but this expansion requires energy and attention. We must break through the hardened ground of our established patterns while continuing to function in our daily lives. Furthermore, root expansion often involves the death of older root sections that no longer serve the tree's current needs. Similarly, psychological growth requires releasing outdated aspects of our identity, abandoned patterns of thought, expired relationships, and commitments. This selective death within the larger process of growth creates its own form of grief and loss. The underground network also reveals the importance of soil quality in supporting transformation. Just as trees thrive in rich, well-drained soil and struggle in depleted or waterlogged conditions, human consciousness requires appropriate conditions for healthy growth. The quality of our relationships, the richness of our intellectual and spiritual environment, the drainage of emotional toxins, all determine whether our attempts at growth will flourish or struggle. Chapter 4: The Violence of Consciousness. Consciousness itself is a form of violence, a disruption of the peaceful unconsciousness that characterizes much of existence. To become aware is to be expelled from the garden of innocent ignorance into the harsh landscape of knowledge and choice. April's cruelty lies precisely in its demand that we become more conscious, more awake, more fully present to reality as it actually exists rather than as we have learned to perceive it through the filters of habit and assumption. The violence begins with the simple act of seeing clearly. Winter's shortened days and protective darkness allow us to navigate life with limited vision, attending only to immediate necessities while avoiding larger questions of meaning and purpose. We develop a kind of tunnel vision that keeps us functional but prevents deeper perception. Spring's expanding light forces a broader view, illuminating aspects of our existence we had successfully ignored. This expanded illumination reveals uncomfortable truths. We see the gap between our professed values and our actual choices. We recognize the distance between our public presentations and our private realities. We become aware of the compromises we've made, the dreams we've abandoned, the aspects of ourselves we've suppressed in service of social acceptance or material security. Such recognition is inherently violent because it shatters the comfortable stories we've told ourselves about who we are and why we live as we do. Consciousness also demands choice, and choice requires the violent act of exclusion. To choose one path means definitively abandoning others. To commit to growth means releasing familiar limitations. To embrace possibility means accepting responsibility for our own transformation. The comfortable passivity of unconscious existence, allowing circumstances to determine our responses, following established patterns without question, must give way to the demanding activity of conscious choice-making. This transition from unconscious reaction to conscious response represents a fundamental shift in the locus of authority. Instead of allowing external circumstances to determine our internal states, consciousness demands that we take responsibility for our own experience. We can no longer blame our conditions for our responses. We must acknowledge our role in creating and maintaining our own suffering. This recognition is particularly cruel because it removes the comfort of victimhood while demanding the courage of agency. The violence of consciousness extends to our relationships with others. As we become more aware of our own complexity and contradictions, we begin to see similar patterns in those around us. The simple categories we once used to understand people, good and bad, friend and enemy, success and failure, reveal themselves as inadequate for containing the full reality of human nature. We must develop more nuanced, more complex ways of relating that can hold both appreciation and disappointment, love and frustration, hope and realism. Perhaps most violently, consciousness disrupts our relationship with time itself. Unconscious existence allows us to drift through our days without fully experiencing their passage, treating life as an endless series of postponements and preparations for some future moment of genuine living. Consciousness forces us to confront the reality of mortality, the finite nature of our time, the irreversible passage of moments that will never return. This awareness transforms every choice into a matter of ultimate significance. The cruel irony is that consciousness, despite its violence, represents our only path to authentic peace. The false peace of unconsciousness is merely the absence of conflict, achieved through avoidance and denial. True peace emerges from the integration of consciousness, not the elimination of difficulty but the development of our capacity to remain present and responsive within difficulty. This requires enduring the violence of awareness while cultivating the wisdom to transform conflict into growth. Spring embodies this paradox perfectly. The season's beauty emerges directly from its violence, the forcing of new life through resistant earth, the breaking of protective shells, the vulnerable exposure of tender growth to uncertain conditions. April is cruel precisely because it models the violence necessary for authentic transformation while simultaneously demonstrating the beauty that such violence can create. Chapter 5: The Economics of Spiritual Energy. Every transformation requires an investment of energy, and spring's cruelty lies partly in its demand that we make this investment when our spiritual resources feel most depleted. Winter's protective numbness, while offering psychological safety, also creates a kind of spiritual atrophy. Our capacity for feeling, for response, for creative engagement with life diminishes through disuse. When April arrives demanding renewed participation in existence, we discover how deeply our spiritual muscles have weakened during their period of hibernation. The economics of transformation reveal themselves most clearly in the gap between our current energy capacity and the demands of authentic growth. Consciousness requires fuel, attention, intention, emotional availability, creative engagement. But months of protective withdrawal have reduced our spiritual metabolism to its bare minimum. We have been surviving rather than thriving, conserving rather than expanding, maintaining rather than creating. The sudden invitation to flourish exposes the inadequacy of our depleted resources. This energy deficit creates a cruel choice. We can remain in the low-energy state of spiritual hibernation, or we can begin the difficult work of rebuilding our capacity for full engagement with life. The former feels safer but leads to increasing deadness. The latter feels overwhelming but offers the possibility of authentic vitality. Neither choice is comfortable, and the decision itself requires energy we feel we don't possess. The rebuilding process follows natural laws that cannot be rushed or circumvented. Just as physical fitness must be regained gradually after a period of inactivity, spiritual vitality requires patient, consistent investment over time. We must slowly expand our tolerance for feeling, our capacity for attention, our willingness to engage with difficulty and uncertainty. This expansion is inherently uncomfortable because it pushes against the boundaries of our established comfort zones. Furthermore, the energy required for transformation must be diverted from other activities. We cannot simultaneously maintain all our existing commitments while also investing in significant personal growth. Something must be released, sacrificed, allowed to diminish so that energy can flow toward new possibilities. This creates practical difficulties in our daily lives and often generates resistance from others who benefit from our current energy allocation patterns. The spiritual economy also operates on principles of compound interest. Small, consistent investments in consciousness gradually yield larger returns in terms of vitality, clarity, and creative capacity. But these returns are not immediately visible, creating a period of faith-demanding investment before the benefits become apparent. Many abandon the process during this crucial development phase, mistaking the lag time for evidence that transformation is not occurring. April's cruelty includes its timing. It demands investment when we feel least capable of making it. The season asks us to commit to growth before we have rebuilt the resources necessary for sustained development. This requires a leap of faith, a willingness to begin before we feel ready, to invest before we can guarantee returns. Such faith feels particularly difficult after winter's lessons in conservation and self-protection. The energy dynamics of relationship complicate this process further. Our personal transformation affects everyone in our orbit, often requiring them to adjust their own energy patterns and expectations. Family members, friends, colleagues, and community members have adapted to our winter state and may resist our spring awakening. Their resistance creates additional energy demands precisely when we need all available resources for our own development. Yet the alternative to this investment is the gradual diminishment of all our spiritual resources. Energy that is not invested in growth begins to stagnate and decay. Unused capacities atrophy. Unexpressed possibilities wither. The safety of spiritual hibernation proves illusory because it leads inevitably to spiritual death. The cruel truth is that we must risk our limited energy on uncertain transformation or lose it entirely to certain stagnation. The wisdom lies in understanding that energy invested in authentic growth generates more energy than it consumes. Consciousness, once awakened, becomes self-sustaining and self-expanding. Genuine vitality creates more vitality. True engagement with life increases our capacity for engagement. But this principle can only be proven through experience, not argument, requiring the initial leap of faith that April's invitation demands. Chapter 6: The Architecture of Authentic Time. Time itself becomes distorted in April's cruel awakening, revealing the difference between chronological duration and existential presence. Winter allows us to live in a kind of suspended animation where days pass without genuine experience, where we move through routines without true participation. This creates an illusion of time management. We feel we are using our hours efficiently because we accomplish tasks and meet obligations. But efficiency is not the same as authenticity, and productivity is not equivalent to genuine living. Spring disrupts this comfortable relationship with time by demanding presence. The emerging life around us, the unfurling leaves, the blooming flowers, the returning birds, exists in pure present moment awareness. Nature knows nothing of yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's anxieties. It responds fully to the conditions that exist now. This natural presence exposes our own temporal displacement, our habitual residence in mental constructions of past and future rather than immediate reality. The cruelty lies in recognizing how much of our lives we have spent in temporal exile. we discover that most of our mental energy has been devoted to rehearsing past conversations, planning future encounters, analyzing previous decisions, or anticipating potential problems. Meanwhile, the only time in which life actually occurs, this moment, has been experienced only peripherally, as the background to our mental time travel. April forces us to confront the bankruptcy of this temporal strategy. The beauty and urgency of spring cannot be experienced through memory or anticipation, it demands immediate presence. But our capacity for present moment awareness has atrophied through neglect. We find ourselves unable to fully receive the gifts that current reality offers because our attention remains scattered across multiple temporal dimensions. This recognition brings a particular form of grief, mourning for all the moments we have missed while physically present but mentally absent. We realize how many sunsets we've witnessed without seeing, how many conversations we've participated in without listening, how many experiences we've moved through without truly inhabiting. The accumulation of unlived moments within our lived years becomes suddenly visible and heartbreaking. The architecture of authentic time requires rebuilding our capacity for sustained attention. This is radically different from the scattered multitasking that characterizes much of contemporary existence. Authentic presence demands that we bring our full consciousness to bear on whatever is immediately before us, whether it be a conversation, a task, a natural phenomenon, or our own inner experience. Such focused engagement requires practice and discipline that we have largely abandoned. Furthermore, authentic time moves at its own pace, which rarely corresponds to our preferred schedules. Growth cannot be hurried, insight cannot be forced, and transformation cannot be managed according to external deadlines. Spring teaches us that authentic change follows natural rhythms rather than human conveniences. This requires developing patience with processes that unfold gradually and acceptance of timing that we cannot control. The transition to authentic time also reveals the poverty of our usual temporal metrics. We measure our days by tasks completed, goals achieved, and obligations fulfilled. But these measurements capture only the external mechanics of existence while missing the internal reality of genuine experience. A single moment of true presence may be more valuable than hours of efficient productivity, and a brief encounter of authentic connection may matter more than extended periods of superficial interaction. April's invitation to authentic time includes the recognition that every moment contains infinite depth. Instead of rushing through experiences to reach future destinations, we must learn to inhabit our current circumstances fully enough to discover their hidden richness. This shift from temporal consumption to temporal appreciation requires retraining our fundamental relationship with duration and presence. The cruel gift of this temporal awakening is the simultaneous expansion and contraction of our time perception. On one hand, we realize how much time we have wasted in unconscious patterns and how finite our remaining opportunities actually are. On the other hand, we discover that fully inhabited moments expand infinitely, containing more life than years of half-conscious existence. Time becomes both more precious and more abundant when experienced authentically. This paradox points toward the deepest mystery of temporal existence. We have all the time we need for what truly matters, but only if we stop squandering it on what doesn't. April's cruelty lies in forcing this recognition upon us when changing our temporal habits feels most difficult and most necessary. Chapter 7: The Resurrection Technology. The final revelation of April's cruelty is also its greatest gift, the recognition that resurrection is not a single dramatic event but a daily technology of renewal available to anyone willing to learn its operation. The season does not simply model transformation, it provides practical instruction in the mechanics of authentic regeneration. Every sprouting seed, every unfurling leaf, every returning bird demonstrates specific techniques for moving from death to life, from dormancy to vitality, from winter's protective numbness to spring's vulnerable flowering. The technology begins with the willingness to let something die. Before any resurrection can occur, There must be an actual death, not metaphorical or partial, but complete. Trees must allow their old leaves to fall completely before new ones can emerge. Birds must abandon their familiar territories to follow migration routes that lead to renewal. Seeds must surrender their protective shells entirely to access the soil's nourishment. Human transformation requires the same willingness to release what no longer serves, even when that release feels like losing pieces of our identity. This death before rebirth principle operates on multiple levels simultaneously. We must die to old patterns of thought that limit our perception, old emotional reactions that no longer protect us, old relationship dynamics that prevent authentic connection, old professional identities that constrain our creativity. Each death feels like a small ending of the world because it dissolves a familiar structure that provided meaning and orientation, even if that structure had become restrictive or destructive. The resurrection technology also requires patience with the invisible phase of transformation. Seeds germinate in darkness before sending shoots toward light. Root systems develop extensive networks before supporting visible growth. Internal chemical and structural changes precede external manifestation. Similarly, human renewal often involves periods of apparent inactivity when crucial reorganization is occurring beneath the surface of consciousness. Learning to trust this invisible development phase is essential for sustained transformation. Vulnerability emerges as another critical component of the resurrection technology. New growth is tender, unprotected, easily damaged by harsh conditions. Young shoots can be destroyed by late frosts, and fresh leaves may be eaten by insects or torn by wind. The natural world accepts this vulnerability as the necessary price of renewal. Plants do not postpone growth until conditions become perfectly safe. They emerge when their internal timing indicates readiness, regardless of external risks. Human resurrection requires similar courage to be vulnerable. We must be willing to express new aspects of ourselves before we feel confident in them, to share our evolving perspectives before they are fully formed, to engage in new ways of relating before we have mastered the skills involved. This vulnerability is not recklessness but rather recognition that growth cannot occur within the safety of established patterns. The technology also demands responsiveness to current conditions rather than adherence to predetermined plans. Plants adjust their growth patterns based on available sunlight, moisture levels, and soil nutrients. They bend toward light sources, extend roots toward water, and modify their size and shape according to environmental factors. This responsiveness requires constant attention to immediate reality rather than rigid following of abstract principles. Perhaps most importantly, the resurrection technology reveals itself as endlessly renewable. Spring does not occur once and then disappear, it returns annually, offering fresh opportunities for growth and renewal. Each season of death and rebirth deepens our understanding of the process and increases our skill in navigating its demands. We do not need to achieve perfect transformation immediately. We need only to participate consciously in the ongoing cycle of death and renewal that characterizes all authentic life. The cruelty of April lies in its insistence that we cannot remain neutral observers of this process. The season forces us to choose: will we participate consciously in our own resurrection, or will we resist the technology of renewal until circumstances compel our transformation? The natural world demonstrates that renewal is not optional for living systems. We can only choose whether to engage consciously or unconsciously with the inevitable process of growth, death, and rebirth that defines existence itself. This choice becomes the ultimate spiritual practice, learning to die consciously to what no longer serves while remaining alert to signs of new life emerging within us. Developing the patience to trust invisible phases of development while maintaining the courage to be vulnerable in our growth. Staying responsive to current conditions while participating faithfully in the eternal cycle of resurrection that April teaches with its beautiful, terrible, necessary cruelty. Conclusion. April is cruel because it offers what we most need when we feel least capable of receiving it. The season forces us to confront the gap between our actual existence and our essential possibility, between the safety of spiritual hibernation and the risk of authentic growth. Its cruelty lies not in denying us renewal but in making renewal continuously available, waiting always for our consent to begin. The lilacs bleeding from dead land represent our own capacity to create beauty from the composted remains of our former limitations. Memory and desire, properly integrated, become the fertile soil from which authentic transformation can emerge. The underground networks of root and connection support flowering we cannot yet imagine, while consciousness provides the light necessary for sustained growth. Understanding April's cruelty transforms it into April's gift. We begin to recognize that the discomfort of spring awakening signals not something wrong but something finally becoming right. The season teaches us that resurrection is not rescue from the human condition but full participation in it, learning to die to what constrains us while remaining open to what calls us forward. In accepting April's cruel invitation, we join the eternal conversation between death and life, dormancy and flowering, the safe familiar past and the uncertain promising future. This is the poet's final wisdom. Cruelty and kindness are not opposites but aspects of the same force that shapes consciousness toward its fullest expression through the beautiful, necessary violence of authentic transformation.